so I am going to share with you. I don't like to say the word preach. I'm going to share what I have gleaned from the book of Hosea this morning, and let's share. I'm going to share the verse that I've chosen. It is Hosea chapter 1, verse 2. When the Lord first began speaking to Israel through Hosea, he said to him, Hosea, go and marry a prostitute, so that some of her children will be conceived in prostitution. This will illustrate how Israel has acted like a prostitute by turning against the Lord and worshiping other gods. So the backstory for Hosea, Tullian gave you a little bit of that last week. Hosea is towards the end of the Old Testament. The Bible is divided into two parts, and it's not equal. The Old Testament takes up a lot more space in the Bible than the New Testament. Hosea is towards the end of the Old Testament. Hosea was one of the minor prophets. Isaiah, Ezekiel, these other names that maybe you've heard, they were major prophets. But Hosea was a minor prophet. I would say that he has a major story, even though he's a minor prophet. But this book of Hosea is very small. It's not a very big book. I have often encouraged people to read it, specifically if they are married, want to be married, or are a human, because it is a story that is seemingly about marriage, but it really is not a book about or for people who are married or want to be married. This is a book about God's people. So you are included in that story. We are all included in this story. So it is scandalous, as you could tell just by the tiny little snippet of it that I read. That's one reason I encourage you to read it, because it gets more scandalous as you read it. And essentially, God is speaking through Hosea, and it says, when the Lord first began speaking to who? Israel, his people. So anytime if you're reading the Old Testament and you see the word Israel, you see the word Ephraim, you see God's people, this is who he's referring to. God is referring to God's people, to you, to me, to people today that we would call the church. Christians, we would call them, professing Christians. And let's not go into whether or not we think we're Christians or whether we think he or she or they are Christians. God's people are God's people, and that's not for us to pick and choose who they are. But in the book of Hosea, when you see the word Israel, Ephraim, this is who God is referring to, God's people. So include yourself in that definition of God's people. And so he tells Hosea to go and find and marry a woman that is a prostitute. Now, we have a blended family, and we have 5 adult children. None at the moment are married. One has been and is divorced, and one is engaged to be married. Neither of us would give any of our children the advice to marry a known unfaithful spouse. Would you agree? Oh, well, they've been dating for a few years. Yes, they have. Do you like him? Do you like her? Oh, yeah, she's completely unfaithful to him. Yeah, like we've wanted him to get married to someone completely unfaithful. This is how crazy what God is saying. None of us would want a parent or somebody we love to commission us or encourage us to marry someone who is going to be an unfaithful, faulty spouse. But here we find God himself telling Hosea, commanding Hosea to go do this crazy thing. And God is a preacher, after all, and he is a preacher who uses illustrations all throughout the Bible. And sometimes, like in the New Testament, he speaks through Jesus, and when Jesus is asked different questions by different people, he speaks in parables. Those are earthly examples of heavenly truths. That's what a parable is, an earthly example of a heavenly truth. And so Jesus is seen and heard often telling stories that we may resonate with. The prodigal son, the seed sower, there's so many ways that he speaks in parables, And they're often non-living parables. But this story, he is asking Hosea to be a living parable, an actual living, breathing parable. This is his real life. This is not like, let's pretend Hosea married a prostitute. He is marrying a prostitute. And not only that does God tell him to do something as absurd as that, he's also telling him to have children with her. Children with her. Despite her unfaithfulness and her running back and forth, she's stepping out often and a lot. And he knows this is going to happen. Any of you that have been married or are married or want to be married, that is one of your greatest fears. It is crippling if you have experienced it. It is absolutely devastating. It is destructive. It is so damaging, not just to the two spouses that are enduring it, but to the reach of it, to your children, to your children's children, to your church, to your friend group, possibly to your job. It is horrible. It is devastating and horrific and traumatic in so many different ways. And I should know because I have experienced this. I have been on both sides of the coin of unfaithfulness and faithfulness and being cheated on. So I've cheated and I have been cheated on. I have been married 2 times before, Tullian. He is my 3rd husband. Most of you know that. It's not big news to a lot of you, but to some of you, you don't know that. And a lot of people, it's kind of comical to some degree in some ways. We will get people who write in or reach out or come to the church, and usually what has drawn them is the fact that Tullian is so transparent and open about his story, how he was a man caught in adultery, how he has handled that, the fallout of that, what it looks like. He's been extremely honest about that, which is something that I applaud and I encourage. But one of the reasons people are like, well, how in the world did you see that happening, or that had happened when you met him, and still engage with him? And this is going to sound somewhat, maybe, I don't even know what it will sound like. I'm just going to say it. It will sound, I have experienced so much of a flavor of what he experienced at his own hands that it did not shock me. Before the age of 3, when I was 3, my mom was starting her 3rd marriage. She had me when she was 15. And by the age of 3, she was entering her 3rd marriage. Now, you could say she's foolish. She's a child. She didn't know what she was doing. Her mother, my grandmother, has been married and divorced 7 times. So, and that's just my mother and my maternal grandmother. I'm not talking about my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my siblings, or myself. So I have experienced full force what it means to be a part of a marriage where someone is unfaithful, including myself. I have not just been on the receiving end of adultery. I have been the woman caught in adultery. And I got married for the first time at 20. And at the time, I had a 2-year-old. My oldest son was 2. And I got married at 20. And 11 years into that marriage, I cheated on my first husband. And it was discovered almost immediately. And to some degree, I wanted it to be found out. I had, at that point, not very much remorse at all for it. In fact, I felt somewhat justified and wanting to move out of that marriage. And this was some way that I could get my first husband back and show him exactly what kind of power I had. And so then ensued a divorce. I came home to find all my clothes outside. If you've ever gone through this on either side, you know how it feels to come home and on either side of the coin, what you want to do is scorched earth. This is what you want to do on either end of it. And so I found my clothes outside. I was absolutely rejected in every way, which in my case, at that point, was okay. I married the man that I cheated with. I ended up marrying him. And 2 years into that marriage, he was unfaithful to me. And I had this whole entire newfound resolve about marriage, because I had been studying marriage because my family hadn't done it well. They didn't have a lot of wisdom to pass on to me. It's not that they didn't love me well, because they did. They didn't know what they didn't know, and they didn't have what they didn't have to pass on. So I studied marriage. I studied love. I wanted to try to get it right. And so in that second marriage, I was determined. And I loved that person, that man, to a degree that it was somewhat easier to be a faithful spouse. So into that 2 years into that marriage, there was unfaithfulness to a degree that a legal battle ensued that went on for 5 years. A literal legal battle in the court system. It forced me, in a way, to call me on the carpet to say, do you love him enough to stay? Do you love him that much? Because you are about to be exposed and crucified and forced to participate in something that you don't even deserve, that is not your burden to bear. But for me, it wasn't even a question at that point. We are one. I am standing beside him, and I will go to the end. I will stay till the end. There was a 7-day public trial at the end of that 5 years of legal battle. And I sat on a witness stand for 7 hours one day to defend my husband at the time. And at the end of all of that, he was acquitted. Life could go back to something that seemed normal and void of that, having learned what we did, having come through that and still be together. And he decided to force a divorce despite that. So he didn't want me anymore, despite standing beside him, loving him through that. He gave me the option before it even started to get out. I would understand if you want to leave me because I don't want you to experience this. And in some ways, it was too hard for him to look at me without feeling guilty because of the truth that he knew. You have sacrificed your children. You have sacrificed yourself. You have sacrificed some things to some degree that he was unwilling to do for me. And so after that divorce, in Texas you can force a divorce, just P.S. Newsflash, I don't know if that's true in other states, but you can. So despite your willingness to stay, it doesn't matter in some places. And so that kind of catapulted me into a forced journey of recovery to a degree that I did not yet know. I had already been in recovery. I had already started learning more about myself, becoming more self-aware, trying to understand the trauma of my life, my family of origin, understanding what faithfulness and love really is, what marriage really is about. And as I did that, that was 4 years before I met Tullian in person and we got married. And so together, as a couple, in having endured what we both have, we have quite the experience on the ground, boots on the ground when it comes to this subject. And so, again, I say to the people who may not understand why it was not more, it was not more of a deterrent for me to stay away from him, knowing that he was a cheater. He had been caught in adultery. Why would you go towards someone that is like that? Because I found myself as being a cheater too. I wore a scarlet letter also, and even though I wasn't cheating actively, I still know that I have a scarlet letter. And it's not just because I cheated on my first husband. It's not because I cheated at all in any way, physically, sexually. It is because I have been unfaithful to God from the get-go. I have cheated on him despite his complete faithfulness to me. I have ran to lesser loves. I have given up the sanctity, the purity, the institution of his commitment to me. I have snubbed that in more ways than I am aware of or can be aware of this side of the grave. I have been unfaithful to him long before I ever thought about getting married. I have wrecked my covenant with God, just like the people of Israel have, and God is addressing them. And if you know anything about the Old Testament, this is all God is doing. The entire Old Testament is showing his people mercy and love and trying to say, this is the way that you should live if you want to live a good life, a free life, a healthy life. This is what you do. This is all you do. 10 little rules. And Tullian is really, literally in a series right now to explain those commandments, those 10 rules that if we would just live by those, we could all live free. We could all be faithful, not just to each other in our friendships, in our personal relationships, in our romantic relationships, but to God. To God, ultimately. Any unfaithfulness I commit horizontally is unfaithfulness vertically also. Every sin is against God, even if it is to a specific person. So once this revelation hit me, I found the book of Hosea. And I was like, oh my gosh. Now he's telling somebody to marry somebody that is like I was, like somebody was to me. Oh, no, this is not right. But this is what God does. He tells Hosea to be a living parable, a living example, so that we would understand what kind of wife God has wedded to himself, what kind of commitment he has made to what kind of woman, we'll call a woman, but the church at large, she's referred to as the church in a feminine way, but it's all of us, men, you're included. So we're all included in this description of Gomer. We are always wanting to make sure that we understand the context of a story. We understand who we're supposed to identify with in the story. And I remember back in my late 20s, one of the first times I read Hosea, I was like, well, I love like Hosea. I mean, that's basically what I do. I really, good job, I mean, you're sacrificial, you put yourself, not, last, but at least, behind him, you're respectful out in public, you have the mantle decorated with the family picture that looks like things are good, right? That's what we do. We want to do that. And so I found myself knocked off my high Hosea horse right into the dirt, face first, when I realized I am not Hosea at all. And that is not who I'm supposed to identify with in the story at all. And neither are you. Neither are the people of Israel. He is wanting them to understand and us to understand. He wanted me to understand that I am Gomer. That is who I identify with in the story. Gomer, that is who you identify with in the story. Whether we want to or not, it is irrelevant if we are resistant to our Gomerness. It exists, sister, nonetheless. Brother, nonetheless, it exists. You have a stamp within your DNA since the garden of your Gomerness. God has been exposing it and meeting it with mercy since Adam and Eve first displayed it largely and boldly right there in a garden, in the very first earthly marriage ever made. Marriage was not invented by us. It was not a human construct. This is something God created. And God created it with his people first and foremost. And we have done a terrible job at keeping our end of the vowels. A terrible job, despite us thinking that we are pulling it off and being faithful. One of the ways that maybe outside of, let's just set prostitution, whoredom, unfaithfulness over here, okay? It's a big ball of nastiness. Our unfaithfulness comes at the cost of our covenant with God all the time. All the time. Even in our Christianity, our churchiness, we will sell out and sell ourselves to religion in a heartbeat. A heartbeat. The Pharisees were prostituting themselves to the law in a way that God told them not to, that Jesus came to relieve them of. Prostituting themselves to debauchery. In the Old Testament, in this time that God is directly talking to his people, they had sold out spiritually, internally. Their hearts were far from him. They found all sorts of other gods to serve. And some of them we know. They were actual golden calves, poles, and statues of gods that they would sacrifice things to. Sacrifice their one true love. They would sacrifice their allegiance to God to pay this God, to give them what they wanted, to make them feel better about themselves, to make them feel pleasure in ways that they wanted to, whatever that may be. Made them feel important, powerful. These gods that they served gave them material things. It gave them a sense of the grass is greener on the other side, and it's not. And you know that if you went over there and visited a yard, you're not supposed to. So this is what the people of Israel were doing, selling themselves out to other loves, to lesser loves, to other gods other than capital G God, their one true love. What does that really look like today? What does that speak to? Where does that speak to you? Where does that resonate with you? What do you think about your unfaithfulness to God? Where is it? How is it? How does that ooze out of you every day? I want to read this story. It's from a book called Mortal Lessons, Notes on the Art of Surgery by Richard Selzer. I don't know if anybody has ever read that book. I've absolutely not read the book. I just have the story excerpt because I think it is a very cool story. So this is the surgeon telling this story. He says, I stand by the bed where a young woman lies. Her face post-operative, her mouth twisted in palsy, clownish even. A tiny twig of her facial nerve, the one to the muscles in her mouth, has been severed. As her surgeon, I had to cut the nerve a little to remove the tumor in her cheek. Her young husband is in the room. He stands on the opposite side of the bed, and together they seem to dwell in the evening lamplight, isolated from me. Who are they? I ask myself. Who gazes and touches each other so generously? Then the woman speaks. Will my mouth always be like this? She asks. Yes, I say. It is because the nerve was cut. She nods and is silent. But the young man smiles. I like it, he says. It's kind of cute. All at once I know what I am witnessing, and I lower my gaze. Unmindful of my presence, he bends to kiss her crooked mouth. And I'm so close I can see how he twists his own lips to accommodate hers, to show her that their kiss still works. That may seem like it has nothing to do with the story of Hosea, but it does. What I have found is that God has come near to our bedside in the person of Jesus. He has not only seen us with our wretched tumors of unfaithfulness and sordid affairs and our prostitution. We are his. We belong to him. But he has come and ransomed us, and he has come straight to the bedside where we are infirmed with something that is not going to go away. Not this side of heaven. It's always going to be this way. There's always going to be that nerve that is severed that would otherwise make us not contorted, distorted, have a malady that we now have and we live with, and now we know it. He has come to the bedside. He has come to this earth in our sickness, in our cancerous, adulterous place. He has crawled into the bed while we're still there. While we're still there in the presence of our lesser loves. While we're still pursuing them and dealing with it, he is there. He has stripped himself naked. He has borne it all. He has contorted himself to fit, crucified on the bed of our shame, on the bed of all of our adulteries. That is what the cross is. It is him kissing the demon of our adultery right in the mouth and looking at us square in the face and saying, I got you, come hell or high water. I will not leave your side. You are my beloved. You are betrothed to me. You are mine. And I will buy you back over and over and over again. I will pay the ransom. I will be ashamed. I will be cut down to nothing here in front of people. I will be spat upon. I will be looked at as stupid, dumb for loving sinners, people who act like they hate me, despite the fact that I love them. They run from me, and I run after them. I pursue them, despite the fact that they run over and over and over again away from me. He hangs there, contorting himself to kiss the demons that we are. He dies as we were, right? As the adulterers that we were, he died as for us because he loves us. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because he wanted us to be with him forever. His vows were really true to us. He meant forever. And oftentimes we say forever in our vows, and we want that to be true when we get married. But if we're honest, there has to be something in the back of our heads that says, I am capable of doing the worst thing that I could imagine. And so is this person I'm marrying. And God knew that. It wasn't like he looked across the earth and he was like, who is going to be my people? Let me choose that group of faithful people right over there. He had no faithful people to choose from. He had no virgins to choose from in that sense. He had no women that weren't used, selling themselves in some way. He looked out and saw all of us, and that's who he chose, despite our scarlet letters. There is a writer, Judd Wilhite, that said, the story of Hosea and Gomer is the second most powerful picture of God's love in the Bible. Other than Christ's death, there is no greater picture of love. I agree with that to some degree. I also think the story of Hosea is a picture of God's great love for us and a foretelling of that death on a cross. It is literally what marriage in general is all about, dying to yourself putting the other person first, loving the person in sickness or in health. And I always warn those that are about to get married, take that very seriously. When it says in sickness or in health, you think about the sickest thing that person can do, and are you going to love them? The sickest way they could be, are you going to stick? Do you love them enough to stay? Even in health, why does it say health? Of course I'm going to love you if you're healthy. You might not. When all things are going well, we tend to wander, right? Prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. Don't we all? When God wedded himself to us, to his people, to me, to you, he committed himself forever to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish always. This is his solemn vow, and he will keep it for us on our end. He has done that. We are a spotless bride, vertically, in the eyes of God. What Jesus did on the cross for us redeems us. It is a redeeming love that we cannot undo. Despite what we continue to struggle with horizontally, that struggle is over vertically. And one day, it will be finished finally, horizontally too. And we will live happily ever after with him. I know that fairy tales are seemingly untrue, and most of us have proven them not to be true. I know that I have. But this one, this fairy tale, this love story about God loving his bride in a way that is unbelievable to us, that none of us could ever do, that none of us could withstand, is unbelievable. But that is the picture of the cross. That is what he has done for us, contorting himself in that way to fit the mouth of his bride, to kiss her and remind her, I'm yours forever. You're not going anywhere. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, why have you chosen such unfaithful people to be your people? I don't understand it, and it's a good thing that I don't have to, because I can't. I know how difficult it is to face my own unfaithfulness daily, not just to my actual spouse, but to you, to the world around me, to the people around me, to the good things that you have given me. Most importantly, to the love you have given me, the forgiveness you have given me, the mercy you have gifted me despite the undeservedness of it. That is the very definition of your love. Grace is undeserved favor. You have lavished it on us scandalously, like in this story. You love us because you love us, not because of anything we do or any way that we change or any promises we make. You love us because you love us, and you won't stop. You've promised that. God, help us to believe that that's the way you love us, that it is that crazy kind of love that we can depend on, that we can have confidence in, that we can be reminded of and remind others of. God, you are the giver of love in every way. God, help us remember it and treasure it and believe it. Where we don't believe it, help us to believe it. Help us to believe it more and more every day, God. We love you, but more importantly, you have loved us in the person of your Son, a bridegroom that has come to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. God, we thank you for that. We thank you for betrothing us to you, your beloved. God, God, when we can't remember any other name, remind us that we are your beloved. We are loved by God. It's in your Son's name that we pray.